to welcome you to another episode of Seeking Voices of Health, Healing, and Hope. I'm your host, Dr. Monica Aggarwal. As you know, I'm a preventive cardiologist who focuses on nutrition and lifestyle to heal illness. But because of my own history of chronic illness, I've learned so much about hopelessness, sadness, and I wanted to start this podcast because I wanted to bring some voices to the hope and healing and overcoming struggle. Today, my guest is Dr. Dean Ornish. Many of you know Dean. He's a fabulous man who's done so many fabulous things in his life. He's the founder and president of the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute and a clinical professor of medicine at UCSF. He's been doing work for 44 years in randomized controlled trials and focusing on how the impact of lifestyle affects your risk of cardiovascular disease and chronic illness in general. He's written fabulous books. How many I don't even know, but his most famous one or most recent one is a New York Times bestseller called Undo It, which I'm most interested in talking about. He has Lifetime Achievement Awards. He has he's considered one of the most extraordinary people according to University of Texas alumni. He's been a Time Magazine innovator, most influential people on Life magazine. Like, I could go on and on, just such a great guy and such an amazing physician and researcher. Dean, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being here on my podcast. I really want to talk about your book, Just Undo It, because it really sings to me, mostly because it talks not only about nutrition and life, but it also focuses on the importance of love and social connection and joy. And I think that's so many areas that we forget to focus on as physicians. But before we talk about that, I thought I'd talk about, let's just start off and just ask you a few questions about your life. Like, you've done so many things and so many incredible things. What are you most proud of? And what are you hoping to, what are your goals for the future? What are you trying to achieve now?
Oh, well, those are pretty big questions. Thank you for the chance to be on your podcast. I really appreciate it. To me, awareness is always the first step in healing. So I appreciate the chance to help raise awareness together. Are you talking about personally or professionally or both?
Sure, either, both. Okay. What are you most proud of?
Well, I started doing this work when I was in college. I didn't start doing the work. I started getting interested in the work when I was in college, when I was at Rice University in Houston. And what I didn't know at the time was that it had the highest suicide rate per capita of any school in the country. Not in their course catalog. I don't know why, but and I began to find out why, actually, which was that I got about as close to committing suicide as you can without actually doing it. I had a kind of a intense version of the imposter syndrome. I felt like, now that I was within a school with a bunch of really smart kids, it was just a matter of time before they realized what a big mistake they made in letting me in. And it didn't help that my college roommate was one of the 4 people that year who scored a perfect score in his SATs. And anyway, it was a whole long drama around that. And I also had this sense of that I could take all the meaning out of life, like, who cares? So what? Big deal. Nothing matters. Why bother? Just kind of this existential depression as well. And one of the hallmarks of depression is that the sense of helplessness and hopelessness, as you know, and that really comes from the sense that it's a true reality distortion, that you really think things are bad. They've always been bad. They'll always be bad. And anytime you thought otherwise, you were just fooling yourself. And that's where that sense of helplessness and hopelessness comes from. It's a true reality distortion. And I would have actually done myself in had my saving grace was that I had run myself so ragged that I developed such a bad case of infectious mononucleosis that I literally couldn't get out of bed. And my parents got wind that I was not doing well. They saw what a wreck I was and went home to Dallas, where I grew up, to their home to recuperate. And my secret plan was to get strong enough to kill myself, as crazy as that sounds. Meanwhile, this was in January of 1972. My older sister had been kind of a child of the 60s, and she had studied with an ecumenical teacher named Swami Satchidananda, who incidentally opened Woodstock, if you happen to see the Woodstock film. It looks like Central Casting's idea of what a Swami should look like. And they decided they would have a cocktail party for him in Dallas at our home there when he came to town to give a lecture. which back in 1972 was really weird, having a Swami come to your home. I mean, today in Dallas, it would be weird, especially back then. So there's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and that was certainly true for me. And in walks this, as I mentioned, central casting's idea of what a Swami should look like, long white beard and long saffron robes and the whole bit. And he started off and gave a lecture in our living room, and he started by saying, nothing can bring you lasting happiness, which I'd already figured out, which is part of why I wanted to do myself in. But then I'm looking at him and going like, well, he looks really happy and I'm not really happy at all. What am I missing here? And he went on to say what really turned my life around, which to many may sound like a new age cliche, but it really had a tremendous impact on my life, which is that while nothing can bring us a sense of lasting happiness and self-esteem and self-worth and well-being, we have that already, that it's our nature. We're born, with very few exceptions, we're born happy and healthy. That is our nature to be happy and healthy until we disturb it. And that not being mindful of that, we, in one of the perhaps ultimate paradoxes of life, we run after so many things that we think that we're told are going to bring us health and happiness. The entire advertising industry is based on this idea that if only you had more whatever, more the right can of beer or the right clothes or the right car or the right house or the right whatever, if only I had more money, more power, more sex, more beauty, more accomplishment, more whatever, then I'd be happy. Then I wouldn't be so, then people would love me and then I wouldn't be so lonely. And what he taught me was that once you set up that view of the world, it's ultimately self-defeating because however it turns out, you feel bad. Until you get whatever that is, you feel bad by definition. And the stakes go way up because it's not just winning or losing. You feel like it's being a winner or a loser. And winners people love and losers people, you're all by yourself. And so the stresses go up according to, concomitantly with that. If someone else gets it and you don't, then you really feel bad. And it kind of reinforces this misperception that we live in this very zero-sum game world, that the more you get, the lesser is for me, and you only go around once, and you better get it while you can and all that. But even if we get it, in the moment, it seems like, now I'm happy. Now, it made me feel good. But then invariably, it doesn't last. It's like, I'm sure at some point in your life said, man, if I just made $20,000 a year, that'd do it, And suddenly it's like, well, maybe 40,000, or whatever. It's like the goalposts keep moving. As one of the patients in one of my later studies said that I can't even enjoy the view from the mountain I've climbed. I'm already looking over the next one, for now what, or so what, big deal. It doesn't really provide that lasting sense of meaning. Another patient later told me the letdown that comes from accomplishing a goal that I thought was going to really give me that lasting sense of well-being was so great that I always made sure I've got 10 projects going at the same time. So when I get that letdown, I can immediately say, well, this didn't do it, but that will, and kind of shift my attention, and the cycle continues. I think it's it's kind of metaphorical that we put people on these treadmills to test them when they have heart disease. It's kind of like that. And so what the Swami taught me is that when you meditate or when you do these yoga-based, stretching, breathing, meditation, and so on, that those don't bring you a sense of well-being or even a sense of relaxation. We think they do. What they do, though, is to simply quiet down our mind and body enough temporarily to experience what's already there. That the health, the well-being is already there, the peace of mind is already there until we disturb it. And so when we quiet it down, we can experience that. It wasn't that those techniques brought it to us, something we didn't already have. And that may sound like, a lot of, parsing words and so on, but it's really quite profound, because if it's out there, then everyone who has what I think I need to be happy and healthy and lovable has power over me. But if it's me, then I can do, not to blame, but then I can empower myself. I can do something about that. And so the question shifts from how can I get what I think I need to be happy and healthy and lovable and feel good about myself, to how can I stop disturbing what's keeping me from feeling that way anyway? And then I can do something about that. And so he said, become a vegetarian and, eat a plant-based diet and meditate and, get some exercise and love more. And I thought, okay, well, I'll move killing myself down to plan B. Let me try this weird stuff first. And growing up in Texas, this is a radical departure in my diet, as you can imagine, eating, meat 5 times a day and chilies and cheeseburgers and chalupas and whatever. But I began to get glimpses. I mean, one of the things that I learned is that if you're in enough pain, whether it's physical or emotional or often both, within that is an opportunity for transformation, because change is hard. Any kind of change is hard. But if you're hurting enough, then the idea of change becomes more appealing. It's kind of like, well, that's kind of weird eating this food and doing all this stuff, but boy, I'm hurting so bad. Let me try this weird stuff, which is part of the reason why I spend my whole life doing research studies, because it can redefine what's possible and show people that if they're willing to make these changes, then they can too feel better too and help reduce that pain. But the pain is there, can really be a catalyst for transformation, a doorway. One of my friends, Rachel Remen, says it's our wounds are our windows of transformation, or Leonard Cohen used to sing, the cracks are what let the light in. These are just different metaphors of saying the same thing. And so I began doing this, and I began glimpses of what that felt like to be peaceful. And he would remind me, he said, when you feel that sense of peace at the end of a yoga class or meditation, to remind yourself that the meditation didn't bring that to you, but rather you were now just, you temporarily stopped disturbing what was there already. And then once you realize that, and you realize it over and over again, if you do it regularly, then you can go out in the world and stay centered in that place of peacefulness, and paradoxically accomplish even more. Because one of the reasons I thought I was stupid was I got so anxious about wanting to do well in organic chemistry and other courses so that I could get into medical school, so that I could be a doctor, so then people would love me and I wouldn't be so lonely. I had so much anxiety when I take a test that I literally couldn't function. I couldn't read a headline in a newspaper and tell you what it said a few minutes later. The anxiety got in the way of being able to do what I otherwise would have been able to. And so when I began to get those glimpses of being more inwardly defined, then the paradox was the less I needed to do well, the more I was able to do well, because I didn't have all that anxiety and fear along with it. So I went back to school, transferred to the University of Texas, graduated first in my class, gave the baccalaureate. And I say that not to brag, but to say I experienced both ends of that spectrum. That when I really thought I had to do well, I couldn't function at all. And when I was more inwardly defined, I could function at a very high level. So then when I went to medical school, I was on Michael DeBakey's surgical service, who basically invented bypass surgery. And he was a kind of very old school. He was the kind of guy who would stick your fingers if you didn't move them out of the operating field fast enough. And and he said, "What year are you, son?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm starting my third year." He goes, "Well, damn, it's going to be so much harder to bust you out of here with these weird ideas you have." So anyway, I didn't hear from him for decades. And just parenthetically, and paradoxically, actually, about 3 years ago, I got this call from him after decades, literally. And he said, "Hey, Dean, this is Mike DeBakey," in a very distinctive accent from Louisiana that I recognized immediately. I said, "To what do I owe this honor?" He said, "Well, you know those weird ideas I used to give you such a hard time about when you were my medical student?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I remember really very well." He said, "That's what's kept me alive all these years." He said, I'm 99 years old. I'm about to die. And I just thought you'd like to know that this is what kept me alive all these years. My wife got interested in your work, and I've been doing it for many years. And I'm 99 years old now. And I just want to thank you before I died. So if you live long enough, you just never know. So that was a good moment. So
that's a beautiful moment.
When I was on his service, we'd cut people open, we bypass their clogged arteries, he'd tell them they were cured. And then more often than not, people would go home and do all the things that had caused the problem in the first place, eat junk food and smoke cigarettes and not manage stress and not exercise and be socially isolated. And so for me, bypass surgery became a metaphor of an incomplete approach, that we were literally bypassing the problem without also treating the cause. Now, sometimes drugs and surgery are life-saving. We've all benefited from that. We've all seen that as doctors. But that's the beginning, not the end. That sometimes you have to save someone, operate or defibrillate them, or, if they're in the middle of an MI, put a stent in or whatever to save them. But then you need to say, okay, now, how did you get in this position? And what can you do to keep from having to be in this again? And that's where, I learned that. And so I went to these places that we used to call libraries, and they had these things called journals that, anyway, I began to realize that in dogs and cats and pigs and rabbits and monkeys, you could cause them to get heart disease if you did all these things we talked about, and you could reverse it if you changed those and did other ones. And I said, well, why should people be any different? They said, well, they just are. They're different, and that at that time it was thought that once you had heart disease, the best you could do would be to slow down the rate at which you got worse. That was as much as you could hope for. And I thought, well, why should people be any different? And one of the nice things about being a second-year medical student is that you don't know enough to know what's feasible yet. You're not fully indoctrinated. So one of the nice things also about going to medical school in Texas and at Baylor College of Medicine was that there's kind of a pioneering ethos in Texas. It's like, you got this weird idea. It's like, it's not going to work, but go for it. You learn something, When I got to the Harvard system later, it was like, I got to do things as a medical student I couldn't do as a senior resident at Harvard. It's so much hierarchical and so on. But anyway, so I took a year off. The chief of medicine said he would support the study and refer patients to it. And the head of cardiology donated the thallium scans and other tests we did, and went to every hotel in Houston and asked them if they would donate space so we could put 10 patients in there for a month. And the last one I went to, the Plaza, said that we could. So it was just me and the cook for a month and 10 patients who had really bad heart disease. And after a month, 8 of the 10, and I did everything except cook. And 8 of the 10 patients after a month got better. Their angina went away. Their blood flow improved as measured by what was then a new test, thallium blood flow, myocardial perfusion. It was also my first experience that when you're doing something that's really doesn't fit within the conventional beliefs of what's possible, it's met with a lot of resistance. People said, "Oh, how do you know they wouldn't have got better anyway? You didn't have a randomized control group." And I said, "Well, technically that's true, but have you ever had any patients get better like this?" "Well, no, but that's beside the point, or how do you know the tests are wrong?" I said, "The tests must be wrong." I said, "Well, these are your tests. You did them. These are the same tests we send people to bypass surgery every day. Why are they suddenly not working?" It's just at that level. But anyway, went back to school, finished my MD, then did another year off before starting my internship and residency, and did a randomized trial which confirmed those findings after just 24 months. Went to Boston, to Harvard and Mass General to do my medical residency, moved to San Francisco, joined the faculty, became a professor at UCSF, began the most definitive study called the Lifestyle Heart Trial, and found, again, that we could show some reversal after a year in the amount of blockages in the arteries, even more reversal after 5 years, whereas the randomized control group got worse and worse, even though they were following the Heart Association guidelines. It didn't go far enough. It's ounce of prevention, pound of cure. It takes a lot to reverse disease, less to prevent it. Then I found that these same lifestyle changes could reverse type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity. We did a randomized trial with the chairs of urology at Sloan Kettering in New York and at UCSF, and we found these same lifestyle changes could stop or often reverse the progression of men with early stage prostate cancer. By extension, it's likely to be true for breast cancer. We did a study with Craig Venter, who was the first to decode the human genome, showing we could change, that when you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes, turns on the good genes, turns off the bad genes. Over 500 genes in just 3 months. And we did a study with Elizabeth Blackburn showing that we could lengthen telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that regulate cellular aging. And when we published this, the Lancet editor sent out a press release called it the first study showing that lifestyle changes may reverse aging at a cellular level. And we're now in the midst of doing the first randomized trial to see if we can stop or reverse the progression of men and women who have early stage Alzheimer's disease. So the book that I wrote that just came out in paperback with my wife, Ann, who I've worked with now for 24 years, is called Undo It. In part, it's an homage to the Swami, because the Swami liked to make puns. And people say, "What are you, a Hindu?" He'd say, "No, I'm an undo." But also my favorite key on the keyboard has been the undo button, which is, it wouldn't be nice if we had one in our lives, and to a larger degree than we thought we do. But it puts forth this unifying theory, which will be coming out soon in the International Journal of Disease Reversal, that why is it, with all this interest in personalized medicine, that these same lifestyle changes can reverse so many different chronic diseases? Because I was taught, like you were, to view heart disease and type 2 diabetes and prostate cancer and so on as fundamentally different diseases, different diagnoses, different treatments. And yet these same lifestyle changes work for so many different conditions. Why is that? And so what I realized is that they're not really so different. We're trained to look at them as different, but they're really not, because they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms: chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome and telomeres and gene expression, overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, changes in immune function, changes in angiogenesis, and so on. And each of those biological mechanisms, in turn, is directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. Or to reduce it to its essence, eat well, move more, stress less, love more. That's it. In fact, the book begins with a quote from Albert Einstein, which is one of my favorite, that says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So just reduce it down to its essence. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease 44 years ago. In other words, the same biological mechanisms affect both. That's why we know what's good for your heart is good for your brain, and vice versa. Less intensive interventions, lifestyle interventions, slow the rate at which people progress into dementia. My theory is that more intensive ones might stop or reverse it. Again, ounce of prevention, pound of cure. And we're halfway through the study now, and we're cautiously optimistic that we hope this will be valuable and show what we hope it'll show. Can't really discuss it yet. But if anyone's listening to that, we're still recruiting the last groups of patients. So just go to ornish.com, myname.com, and there's information on how you can enroll or if you have a loved one. And because we're now doing the intervention via Zoom, we can work with you wherever you are. We'll send you 40 weeks worth of meals, 21 meals a week for 40 weeks for you and your spouse or caregiver, so to make it easy to be on the program. Medicare, after many years of review, agreed to cover my reversing heart disease program in hospitals and clinics back in 2010. That was a real game changer because when you change reimbursement, it changes medical practice and education. But just in October, they've agreed to cover it when it's done via Zoom. So now you don't have to live within driving distance of a hospital, a clinic, or physician group that we've trained. You can live anywhere in the country. So that'll help reduce health disparities and reduce health inequities. And you can live in rural areas or food deserts or anywhere, and you can, as long as you have internet access, and we can do it in your own home via Zoom, and Medicare will pay the whole thing. So if you're interested in that program, go to ornish.com and let us know, and we'll send you some stuff about that too.
And in the second program, are you delivering meals as well, or people are making their own?
And they get 5 weeks worth of meals for that as well, just to really help with the transition. And because these biological mechanisms are so dynamic, when you make big changes all at once, you feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for making those changes from fear of dying to joy of living, from preventing something bad from happening, like a heart attack or stroke or whatever, years down the road, which is really not sustainable, to joy and pleasure and love and feeling good, which are. In the case of heart disease, if you go on this program for 5 weeks, there's a greater than 90% reduction in the frequency of chest pain or angina. And so for someone who can't, walk across the street without getting chest pain, or make love with their spouse, or play with their kids, or go back to work without angina, now they can do all those things. They say things like, I like eating junk food, but not that much. I like being able to do these other things even more. And so what I gain is so much more than what I give up. Yeah, I'll probably live longer, but back when I was suicidally depressed, if you told me that I was going to live longer if I just, changed my lifestyle, I'd say, you don't get it. I don't know if I want to get through the day. A lot of people feel that way. It's one of the reasons why, it's very hard to get people to change their behavior if you only give them information. It's not like I would say, hey, Monica, I want you to quit smoking. Did you know it's bad for you? And you go, gosh, I didn't know that. I'll quit today. It's like everybody. It's on every pack of cigarettes, right? That it's bad for you. So what I've learned is that we have to focus not just on the information or the behavior, but on the motivation, what's really going on in someone's life. And the real epidemic, I think, is not just heart disease or diabetes or prostate cancer or Alzheimer's. It's loneliness and depression. Yes. With a breakdown of the social networks that used to give people a sense of love and connection and community. 50 years ago, most people had a neighborhood that they grew up in, that they knew their neighbors. They had 2 or 3 generations of people living there. They had a church or a club or synagogue they went to regularly. They had a job that felt secure that they'd been at for 10 years or more. They had, an extended family they saw regularly. And many people, they don't have any of those. And, I wrote a book back in 1998 called Love and Survival that reviewed what were then hundreds and now literally tens of thousands of studies, many of which I review in the Undo It book, that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely of pretty much all causes when compared to those who have a sense of love and connection and community. And by the way, suicide in adolescence is now the #1 cause of death in people in that age group. So I understand that in a way that most people don't. And we tend to think that the time we spend with our friends and family and loved ones is kind of a luxury that you do after you've done all the important stuff. And what we now know is that it is the important stuff. And then when I ask people, like, why do you smoke and overeat and drink too much and work too hard and abuse substances and so on, these behaviors seem so, maladaptive. They'd say they're not maladaptive. They're very adaptive. You don't get it. They help us get through the day. They help us deal with our pain and our loneliness and our depression. I've had patients say, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes and they're always there for me and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or food fills that void. Or well-known food writer said, fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain. Or, opioids, we have an opioid epidemic, numb the pain. Or alcohol numbs the pain. People are more drinking more than ever. Or other drugs numb the pain. Or video games, are way better, 3 times the size of the movie industry now because they are so good at distracting ourselves from our pain. Or working all the time, we've all used as a good way to distract yourself from your pain. So I've learned that it's not enough, again, to just give people information or focus on the behaviors, but if we deal with their loneliness and their pain, and help them use the experience of suffering as a doorway or a motivation or a catalyst to change their diet and exercise and meditate and do these things, and to get glimpses of what it means to quiet down your mind and body and to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and love and well-being. I can't tell you how many people have said things to me, and I'm sure they've said to you, having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Right.
Hasn't anyone ever told you that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, remember, I also have rheumatoid arthritis. And when I was diagnosed, it was pretty bad. It sort of couldn't even climb the steps, and it was sort of crawling around. And I often reflect and have told my kids that sometimes the worst things that happen to you end up being the best things in your life. And so the power of change. And
for me, it was being suicidally depressed. For someone else, it might be, having a heart attack or whatever. And so what I'm really trying to do is to help people use the experience of suffering as a doorway for transformation, because ultimately we're all going to die. It's just a question of when. And for me, the more important questions are how well we live, not just how long we live, and what really brings us a sense of meaning. I learned when I was in college, I could take all the meaning out of life, as we talked about, but I also learned that I could put meaning back in. And one of the best ways of creating meaning in life is to live a life of service, to help other people. If someone hears this podcast and it helps them transform their life in some way, that makes me feel really good. That brings me a sense of meaning. That's why I love being a doctor and love the opportunities to reach so many different people with information that can really be meaningful to them, because it really makes it meaningful to me as well.
Everything you've said is amazing. You're blowing my mind. Stuff that I live in this space too, but it's just so lovely to hear you say it. One of the things that I think about and reflect a lot with people is on this concept of loneliness and lack of joy, and how to give people community. And I struggle with, I think about you back in college, and all of a sudden the Swami says to you that, that you should focus more and get rid of the distractions, focus on that, what you inherently have. But I struggle personally as a physician to get people to find those components of joy in their life, or to look at the parts that make them feel lonely, and to try to find that joy and love. How did you that day say, okay, I'm going to do this? And how do we as doctors and as community members, how do we give people that desire to change and to desire to be more and to feel more full?
Well, that's the beauty of pain. We don't look for pain, but sometimes there it is, And so, I was trained like you were to kill and bypass and numb pain, right? But what I try to do is to help people say, hey, the pain's not the problem. The pain's the messenger. It's saying, hey, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest. And you can do something about that. Again, not to blame, but to empower people, because then you can do something about it. So our support groups, for example, there's the eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. People say, okay, I get the eat well and exercise. Yeah, you're really doing something, move more, and stress less. Okay, I get that too. I'm pretty stressed. But love more, that sounds really touchy-feely. And what is that all about? And I used to get defensive and say, they say, oh, you live in San Francisco, it's you live in California, it's an altered state. They'll do anything there, that kind of stuff. And I get defensive. I say, no, look at our hard science, look at our quantitative arteriograms and our positron emission tomography and blah, blah, blah. And then one day I said, you know what? It is touchy-feely. That's what makes it work so well. We are touchy-feely creatures. We're creatures of community. That's what people are really hungry for, is that sense of love and connection and community. So our support groups are not about supporting people to stay on the diet. It's really about creating a place that feels safe enough, yes, where people can let down their emotional defenses and talk openly and authentically about what's really going on in their lives. Which used to be when we'd have, as I mentioned earlier, you'd have an extended family or a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people. Why is that important? Well, partly is that because they know you. They don't just know your Facebook profile. They know, you said all those nice things about me when you introduced me, but you could also say, oh, here are his demons, and here are his dark side, and here's the time he got busted, and here's the time he almost committed suicide, and here's the time, whatever, And when you grow up in a family, extended family or a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people, they know that dark stuff about you. They've seen it. They've watched you grow up, and you know that they know, and they know that you know that they know, and they're still there for you. And there's just something really profoundly human about being fully seen, warts and all. It's kind of like in Avatar when they said, I see you, which is really from an African proverb. I see all of you. One of the studies that my wife Ann and I cite in our new Undo It book is to say that the more time you spend on Facebook and social media, the more depressed you are. Why is that? Because Facebook's supposed to connect us, right? But it's not an authentic connection. It looks like everybody has this perfect life but you, because you don't post your demons on your Facebook page. You don't say, oh, here's the time I was filled with self-doubt, and here's the time that my kid got arrested. It's like, here I am in front of the Eiffel Tower with my perfect family, doing perfect things. And it looks like everybody's got it together but you, and it just makes you feel even worse. Whereas when you grow up in an extended family, that that's not the way it is. And so in our support groups, what we try to do is to recreate that, to create a safe place where people can not just talk about their good stuff, but to say, here's what I'm struggling with, and here's my fears and my anxieties. And we encourage people to talk about their feelings, because even though it's so easy to make fun of, because it's really our feelings that connect us. If I were to, let me just give you an example. Close your eyes for a moment and just tell me how it feels. And if you're listening to this, don't do this if you're driving, but otherwise just close your eyes and tell me how you feel when I say the following. I think you're a jerk and I think you're wrong. And then open your eyes. How did that feel? Not so great, right?
Of course, yes.
But even though I'm just playing, at some visceral level, how did it feel?
Yeah, it's annoying. You're bothered. Why would you say that? Irks you?
Yeah, and did it make you want to get to know me better at that moment?
Surely not.
Yeah, exactly. Most people, have two basic responses. They withdraw, they either literally leave the room, or they stop listening, or they attack back. I'm not a jerk, you're a jerk. Either way, if the goal is that anything that brings us together is healing, even the word healing comes from the root to make whole, and yoga is from the Sanskrit to yoke, to unite, to union. These are really old ideas. Anything that brings us together is healing. It takes us in the opposite direction if I say that. Now close your eyes again and tell me how this feels. I feel angry and I feel upset. And then open your eyes. Same or different?
Certainly different. More sympathy, more curious. Why do you feel that way?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. It actually brings you closer to me. I want to know more about why do you feel that way? There's an openness to hearing me. You're not really shutting down. You're not leaving. You're not attacking me back. You're like, oh, why is that? Now, what's the difference between these two things? One is, it's not about just being nice or saying only nice things. My mom wrote a song years ago called "If You Can't Say Anything Good About Anyone, Don't Say Anything at All." But it's not about that. It's about, one is a thought and one is a feeling. And they're not about, it's not even a nice feeling. It's I'm angry, I'm upset. These are, quote, negative feelings, and yet they bring you in because it's a feeling expressed as a feeling. And it's our feelings that really connect us. And so in our groups, we ask people to identify what they're feeling and to express it as a feeling. As simple as that. And it's amazing. We bring people together who have never met each other. And now we're doing it all via Zoom. These are people who've never met ever. And they are within the first hour are opening up and sharing things that are deeply personal, that are really powerful, because we're so hungry for that sense of permission to be able to really be authentic with each other in that way. Somebody might say, I may look like the perfect dad, but my kid's on heroin, or, I may look like I'm really wealthy, but I'm really not, or whatever it is, I may look like I'm, well, we're the perfect couple, but we fight all the time. And then it's not about staying on the diet. It's about creating that sense of a loving environment where people can be authentic with each other in ways that don't feel like attacks or judgments. And it's the part of the program that people often have the most apprehension or confusion about, but invariably it's the part that's the most meaningful, because we have this hunger for that sense of connection and community. And when we don't have that, then we use all these other behaviors to, numb us out or distract ourselves from feeling how painful it is not to have that in our lives.
Yeah, gosh, it's so beautiful. I love it so much. I'm running a study myself right now. It's a nutrition study on olive oil, actually, and looking at the impact of low versus high olive oil in patients in a plant-based diet. And we're almost done. So I'm looking forward to the results. But the reason I bring that up is that the part that is so interesting is we've been doing this cooking Zoom class. It's all on Zoom. And people in this class, they just want to be in this class all the time. Like they don't want to leave after the 8 weeks. They want to just continue. So we all exchange numbers, and they all, they set up meetings because it's exactly what we're all missing is connection. And they just love the connection. And so much more than the dietary change is just the connection to each other. Right. So much but I still, like, how do we, you and I are so in line on this. I mean, I more than anything, I hug, I touch, I hug my patients. I'm all about that connection. And, there's a lot of tears and emotions in my clinic, and I embrace that. I love that part of medicine, because more than anything else I do, I think is just talking about those things, about joy. And sometimes we look in the mirror and we say, what is it about yourself that you love? And people don't want to look in the mirror at themselves, and they don't want to, there's nothing there that I love, and so how do you, this is decades of sadness that people are going through. And, you bring up social media, and you bring up, so people, how jaded and numb we've become to emotion. I mean, we're going the wrong way. I mean, right. I mean, the internet and everything is pulling us further away from each other and not pulling us toward. So I feel this so confusing, because, we don't, how to get those connections back. And everybody's almost afraid to connect, and we're afraid of what we might say or what we might do, or to show weakness. I mean, I even think of when I became sick, I didn't want to tell anybody that I was sick, because I was afraid that people would judge me or think less of me. And, so much of that is built in. Like, how do we begin to tackle this? It's just an amazing problem.
Well, you've kind of answered it yourself already, because you're doing a lot of those things already, in your work. You have this cooking class, you hug your patients, you make it clear you care about them, you love them, you can only be intimate with someone to the degree you can be vulnerable, or open your heart, to be metaphorical. And you can only do that to the degree you feel safe. So one of the things we do in our group is we say, what goes in the group stays in the group, that everything has to be kept confidential, so that you can be vulnerable. Because otherwise, if you feel like you share something and somebody misuses that, then you're never going to open up again. And so creating that safe space is really important, which is one of the great things about being a doctor, is that although people, only like 10% of people think Congress is doing a good job, most people still respect their doctors. They may have issues about medical care in general, but the doctor-patient relationship is really sacred. And sacred just means the most special, the most intimate, the most safe, if you will. So that in your privacy of the work you're doing, you're already doing that with your patients. You know how to do that already. You already are doing that. And that's incredibly meaningful for them and incredibly meaningful for you. I mean, people don't sue their doctors when they feel that they care about them that way, even if they don't practice medicine very well. I mean, we just need to understand that for every reason, that's the way that we should be practicing. Now, if you have to see a new patient every 8 minutes, it's really hard to do that. And so that's why it was so important to me to get Medicare to create this benefit category, so that we have 72 hours with people, not 8 minutes. And we're still showing that it cuts costs in half in the first year. So when we work on the underlying causes, rather than just treating the symptoms or just giving people drugs, again, drugs and surgery have their place. But so often we find that when we can motivate people to change their lifestyle, that under their doctor's care, that their blood pressures start to get so low, they have to reduce or get them off their antihypertensives, or their blood sugars come down so much they have to get off these diabetes drugs or their cholesterol lowering drugs that they were told they'd have to take for the rest of their lives, or they can avoid procedures that they otherwise might have done. So whether you look at it through the lens of the touchy-feely lens of this is the most meaningful way to practice medicine, or this is the way to motivate people to really change their lifestyle, or from the cost savings, or from the sense of engagement. I mean, you mentioned that people don't want to stop at the end of 8 weeks. After our 9-week program, people continue to meet on their own. We have people who've been meeting for decades, literally, on their own in these self-directed communities, because this is a fundamental human need. It's as fundamental as eating and breathing and sleeping, is the need for love and connection and community that so unfortunately so often goes unfulfilled in our culture.
It's beautiful. You have a daughter, and I have 3 kids myself. What's that?
I have a 21-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter. Yes,
I remember the 12-year. I remember seeing her on Zoom one point. And I think about her, I have a 11, 13, and 15-year-old. And I think about them, and I think about this connection. and I think about the way our kids are growing up, how do you try to impact your daughter's life in teaching her about the importance of love and connection and vulnerability?
Well, I think I learned as much from my daughter as she learns from me. I think maybe even more. This is, let me just share my screen with you for a moment. This is, I can't scale the screen. Anyway, she's a little avatar. I mean, she's the most loving person I think I've ever met. I mean, literally, if I go out of the room for a minute and come back in, or my wife does, "Oh, Dad, I love you so much," And I mean, she's just teaching us to express it all the time, and she's also the funniest person. It's like having Robin Williams and Buddha as your daughter kind of combined into one. She's like one of the funniest people as well. So we don't have to teach her that. We just try to model that. I mean, my wife and I, we each call each other true love, which is kind of sappy and wonderful. We have ever since we became lovers many, many years ago. And we just try to create that same kind of loving environment in our home. And that just, becomes self-fulfilling in a good way.
Oh, it's lovely.
So let me just say that I am so grateful to you for being that loving light for so many people, and for the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. And I hope at least part of it's been helpful.
Oh, it's been amazing, Dean. You're fabulous, and I truly been blown away, just captivated listening to you. You are, I've worked with you in so many things when we've worked on papers and together for the Nutrition Council, and that's a different Dean. And then there's the Dean you see on television, and that's also a different. But the person that I see here today, it's warmed my heart. And what's been beautiful about talking to you is that I really think about people as onions, and there's so many layers, and I've only maybe seen these layers, and really seeing those inside layers has been. I'm thankful that you were sharing, and I also I'm thankful that you shared some of that history of your college life, because I think people see you as sort of the guy who's made it, or the man who knows it, or knows everything. And to also remember and remind people that it started out as not knowing, and it started out with feeling a lot of the same vulnerability and anxiety and sadness that we all feel, and how you kind of worked through it and climbed and rose to become the person you are. And I'm thankful for who you are, that you're here, and that you offer so much to the community. And thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, well, deep appreciation to you as well. I take solace in knowing that the light drives out the darkness. It doesn't even have to be a bright light. And so keep shining your bright light. And there's a lot of darkness in the world now, but I think that it just means that what we're doing is that much more important. So let me know how I can continue to support you, because what you're doing is fabulous.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye.